So okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. One of the great problems we have with this program is that the powers that be sometimes, whether they actually exist in reality or not, is another matter, and myself and our guest will be discussing this later. But it seems rather curious that the minute I went live today, my web access went down, literally to the second. And this happens far, far too often for it just to be chance. And it tends to, our guests and myself and Sarah get quite jumpy about these things. But fortunately, today's guest is somebody who is all too aware of this, and it is somebody that I have heard incredible information about from so many people, and it's somebody I've long wanted to interview because of this. It's the great Paul Levy, who is a most phenomenal writer. His work is extraordinary, and there's an awful lot of incredibly famous people like Sting and everybody else, who really rate him extremely highly. And I've read through some of his work, and I find it quite extraordinary. Paul is a pioneer in this field of spiritual emergence, and as he describes himself, a wounded healer in private practice. He's written a number of books, one of whom, Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil, was published by North Atlantic Books. And you guys who watch this show regularly will know that a previous guest on this show is Richard Grosinger. And Richard is a good friend of mine and clearly a good friend of Paul's. And on top of that, you guys will also be aware that Sarah's book is also being published by Inner Traditions under the tutelage of Richard Grosinger as well, which is really great news. And Paul's latest book is also an Inner Tradition. So there's lots of links here. But I think in order to understand exactly Paul's background, I think very much his experiences are tied in with his writings. So I think, Paul, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, and what made you discover your work in life and your reason for being, and indeed we can then move on to get the context of your work to greater detail. So please let us know.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. So, I was just having a normal, happy, healthy life as a kid. And I'm an only child, and unbeknownst to me, my father was a really sick man. And without going into the story, when I was in college and individuating and separating, that's when all of a sudden this abuse began happening, where my father was unbelievably holding on and literally identified with me and wanting to possess me, wanting me to not separate and individuate. And without going into the story, it created enormous suffering for me, just over the top suffering, to the point where I went from being a really accomplished kid to not being able to live my life. And I'm talking, this really began happening in my early 20s. And the suffering was so overwhelming, because what had happened is that I had basically internalized the external abuse that my father was enacting whenever I expressed my individuated, or the emerging self that I was discovering that I was. As I was doing that, and then he would just completely react in this murderous.
What age were you when this
So
started?
I was basically starting 19 through 22. So it was right when I was in college. And, at that point, I was beginning to just expand my consciousness and realize I was an artist and do psychedelics, and just really getting in touch with myself and stepping out of the image of who my parents, thought I was and wanted me to be. I was discovering who I was. And basically, so, my father's reaction was just to obliterate that emerging self. And what I'm basically saying is that that abuse became internalized inside of my mind. And the suffering was so intense. So I finished college. I went from the East Coast to the Bay Area. And I was 22, 23 years old. And it was like the trauma just emerged in my mind, and it literally stopped me. I was like, oh my God, what do I do? And the only thing I could figure out to do was to go inwards, was to really assume the position of being the witness. That was the only thing that in the slightest way was helping my suffering. And then after doing that for maybe about 4 hours a day, I mean, I was really, there was nothing else that I could do or wanted to do. and I had an awakening. And what I mean when I say an awakening, I got hit by a bolt of lightning, but not from the sky, but inside of my brain. It just ignited. And within 24 hours, I began, it was like having this radical personality change where all of a sudden I was realizing, oh my God, we're having a collective dream. And everybody I was realizing were dream characters. And I was so ecstatic and just over the top excited and enthusiastic around what I was realizing that, I couldn't contain myself. And, from my friend's point of view, oh my God, Paul's having a psychotic break. And so right away, within that first 24 hours, I got driven, by ambulance to my first psychiatric ward and diagnosed and medicated. And then I got let out after 3 days. And that in itself is a whole story. But during those next almost couple years, maybe about 4 other times, I got hospitalized because I was a free agent. I wasn't in an ashram or a monastery. And I was having this profound realization of the dreamlike nature. And what I mean was that things were happening that were physically impossible, or at least physically impossible according to the programming that I had taken in my life. Things were happening that could only happen in a dream. And particularly, I was getting to meet my teachers, these real accomplished spiritual teachers from Asia who have become like family over the years. And when I was in their sphere, when I was around them, it was like the third dimensional space-time continuum would warp, and completely dreamlike, impossible things were happening. And I understand now I was being shown something. I
Mm.
was being taught something about the nature of reality, but it was so destabilizing that, like I said, about 4 other times I was hospitalized, diagnosed, and the tragedy of it. So I got out of the last hospital in 1982, and everybody, my family, my relatives, my friends, everybody was in alignment that I had a mental illness. I was diagnosed with having this chemical imbalance that had just been announced the year before in the DSM-3. And I knew that I wasn't mentally ill. I mean, that was made so clear to me, by my inner experiences. And that's what saved me. The fact that, because everybody was, reflecting back, you're in denial of your mental illness. You need to be on this medication the rest of your life. Like, from the psychiatric point of view, they would have considered it a successful treatment if I would have agreed to their diagnoses that I was mentally ill. And if I would have, subscribed to that, they would have been like happy, and it would have killed me. It would have completely destroyed my life. But I was fortunate in that, because the experiences were so clear, not for a second did I buy into that. But then I was doubly traumatized from the abuse with my father and then psychiatry. So it took me a long time, over a decade, of going to therapy, connecting with my dreams, studying Jung, alchemy, shamanism, dreaming, making art, on and on. And then maybe after about 12 years, I realized, well, I'm not certainly an enlightened person, but at least I've integrated enough. And I realized through the ordeal, I have a gift. I've discovered something not only in myself, but that's medicine for other people. That was in the early to mid 90s. And that's when I started my work and teaching and writing and having groups. But the tragedy, so my parents both died completely convinced that I was just in denial of my mental illness. And my father, who was playing the role of the abuser, he wrote the story. He was the one who spread the narrative to all the extended family that Paul is just this mentally ill person. And so when my parents died, I never heard from the rest of my relatives ever again, and haven't had a family for 20 years. But, I mean, it's all good. I have this huge soul family, a whole big group of friends. But that was like the tragic aspect. And so that's really, so when I write about this mind virus, the Wetiko mind virus, I realized this same darker force that came through my father that was informing his acting out abuse, it was like it had shifted channels and was then coming through psychiatry, through the system. And then I began to realize it's the same non-local darker force that exists, that pervades the collective unconscious, including my own mind, including all of our minds. That's when I began to discover my work on Wetiko.
This is intriguing, isn't it? Because we read throughout history, when people have profound spiritual experiences from Jakob Boehme and various other individuals throughout history, that it's a completely mind shattering experience. And I know that Richard Grosinger himself, when we were interviewing him, he was explaining about his experiences as well. And it seems that you suddenly see through, for want of a better term, the matrix. It's the seeing through into
Yeah, yeah,
something else. Now, I'm
right.
very intrigued. So, before we move on to Wetiko, there were two things that I'm very interested in. The first one is when your experience first started, when you first started to see through the facade, what I call the Bohemian IMAX or the pleroma,
Right.
sorry, the kenoma. How did it manifest the very first time when you sort of realized that this is not what it seems? You mentioned that you had some experience. Could you explain about that? And then secondly, the
Yeah, yeah.
evidence that the experiences you then had that really proved to you that this is not what it seems, that you were seeing through the doors of perception.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll just tell you the very first experience that happened. I get hit by that bolt of lightning, and then within 24 hours, I get brought to a hospital because I'm acting so excited about what I was experiencing. And so there are many, many of these paranormal, out of the ordinary experiences, but I don't talk about them because my inner guidance says no, 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 they're not to be made public. But the one I'm about to share, I've been given permission to share. And what happened, they bring me to Highland Hospital in Oakland, California from San Francisco. It's early evening. I get brought into my first psych ward, and I come into a room, and I'm in this completely exalted state. I mean, I'm just having realization of, oh my God, this is a dream. And I walk in, they lead me into the lounge, and they had just had dinner, the patients, and you know, I see this older woman, and she's blind. Her eyes are opaque. She can't see. And without even thinking about it, I just go up to her, and it was like I was given a script. Out of my mouth spontaneously comes the words, as I'm staring in her eyes, which are dead and opaque. All you have to do see is open your eyes and look. And I keep on repeating, and it's like I'm channeling. It's like I'm not saying them as my egoic conscious mind. And the whole thing took about a minute. I keep on repeating this. I get closer to her eyes, which I'm looking at. Within a minute, her eyes regain their luminosity, and she regains her sight. As if choreographed, at that moment, they take me and they strap me up on a table, which is where I spent the night, just strapped up. And then in the morning, they unstrap me. They put me in a room, and who's the only other person in the room but this now ex-blind woman? And she's smiling, from ear to ear, not saying a word. And all of a sudden, my heart chakra opens, and I realized, oh, I get it. She was hysterically blind, and she was at the point in her process of being, it was the time for her to heal, but she needed a reminder. She needed somebody to say those lines. It was like I was an Uber driver who was like in the neighborhood, and I got sent to by central casting to just pick up a role. And then I realized, oh, and she's a reflection of that part of me that isn't looking inwardly and was manifesting, physically in her blindness, but that was symbolizing my own inner blindness. And then she said to me the one thing she ever said, and that is, she all of a sudden says, aren't you going to answer the phone call from your father? And she mentions my father's name. And then 10 seconds later, the nurse comes in the room and says, Paul, your father's on the phone, because my parents had just gotten word that I had had a supposed psychotic break. And so things like that began happening. So to give you a sense of seeing through the veil, and that was that wasn't an impossible situation. That was a highly ridiculously unlikely auspicious coincidence of factors, but it's still in the realm of probability. There's other stuff that I'm not really, going to share, which is like not just highly ridiculously unlikely, but is completely physically impossible. But like I say, my guidance says don't really talk about that publicly. And so when you have an experience like what I just shared with that blind woman, and
Mm.
people are telling you, "Oh, you're chemically imbalanced, you're mentally ill," you just think they don't have a clue. They're ignorant. But that experience is an example of how, that's what saved me. And I realized over the years that encoded in that experience with the blind woman is my whole work. because the Wetiko mind virus, it's a blindness. It's a form of mind blindness that doesn't know it's blind. And all I was doing with that blind woman, I wasn't healing her blindness. No, I was just open to whatever healing was wanting to happen in the field. And because I was an open instrument, the deeper healing, just I was like a vehicle for some healing to come through. And the point is, we can all do that and play that role for each other.
Well, can you tell us now about what you mean by Wetiko? Because it's a fascinating concept in the first place, isn't it? So you tell us about the
Sure.
background to the word and then how
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
developed it.
Yeah, so the word Wetiko, it's this indigenous word, a Native American word, which basically means the spirit of evil. It's a cannibalistic spirit. And it, it's a psycho-spiritual disease of the soul. And what I've done, because when I came across the word Wetiko, I had realized, oh my God, this precisely describes that non-local evil that I was experiencing with my father, that he had been taken over by and by the system of psychiatry. And so the thing about Wetiko, it's this virus of the mind. So it's the real virus. It's the real deadly virus that's gone pandemic in our world. The coronavirus is a lower level emanation of the Wetiko mind virus. And it's this disease of the soul. And it's a form of blindness. But like I was saying, it's a form of blindness that doesn't know it's blind. And not only does it not know it's blind, it thinks it's more sighted than people who actually see. But the thing about Wetiko, which is amazing, so it's a quantum phenomena. It's not just the source of the deepest evil that we play out. Yeah, it is. And being a quantum phenomena, it's in a superposition of states in the sense that encoded within the pathology of Wetiko is its own medicine, is its own vaccine. And not only is its own vaccine, but it actually is offering us this gift. It's helping us to recognize the dreamlike nature. Okay. But because it's this dreamed up phenomena that has no objective existence. So I don't want people to be afraid going, oh, there's a mind virus and I should be afraid of it, because no, it doesn't even exist whatsoever separate from our own mind. And yet it can destroy our species, you see, and that's pointing at the incredible creative power that each one of us have. And we have it right now, 24/7. We've always had this unimaginable creative power. Wetiko has no creativity, but it actually plugs into our creativity to the extent that we're not aware of it and turns it against us in a way that's killing us. And one final thing about Wetiko that's so mind blowing, it's an inner disease of the soul that actually expresses itself via the medium synchronistically of in the outside world. So if you think about that, it's an inner disease of the psyche that actually is able to extend itself out in the world and synchronistically configure events so as to express a psyche that's under its thrall. What I've just described, that's a dream, where the inner condition of the dreamer is actually getting reflected via the outer forms of the dream. So when you begin to see the dream-like nature, then that's the doorway into seeing Wetiko. Because Wetiko, it doesn't exist just out there. Yeah, there are people who become taken over by it in any given moment and act it out. But if we think, oh, they have Wetiko and I don't, that state of polarization and separation, that induces that sense of otherness, that, oh, they're sick and I'm not. That polarization and fear and otherness and separation, that's the soil out of which Wetiko, it'll grow. The point is, if you see somebody or some, thing playing out Wetiko out there, and you recognize that's a reflection of that same Wetiko energy in me, that's where you're beginning to see the dreamlike nature. And that's the stance that you're able to actually integrate Wetiko, because Wetiko, it distracts us by thinking the problem and the solution is outside of ourselves. And as soon as we do that, because it works through the projective tendencies of the mind, we literally hypnotize ourselves by our own projections. That's Wetiko.
What is its source then? Where is it? What exactly? Where does it come from? I know it comes from our own inner psyche, but can you tell us a little bit more about it? Its
Yeah,
genesis,
yeah, yeah.
really.
Right. It's so interesting, the idea of what is the origin of Wetiko? Like, is it like negative ETs, or was there a
Mm.
collective trauma or whatever? And what I point out in my next couple of books, on Wetiko, I contemplate this process. And in spiritual traditions, they'll talk about that evil is not seemingly a mistake, but it's encoded into the fabric of the universe and it's not separate from deity. And that somehow having this force of evil it just co-emerges with our potential for freedom. That if we want to actualize our freedom, there's something about the powers of darkness that both seemingly obscure our freedom and take it away, while at the same time inspiring us to actualize it. So in my study on Wetiko, I mean, I would be super interested. Oh, here's the genesis, here's what happened. But as best as I can tell, the Wetiko virus actually gets regenerated each and every moment with our participation. So it's something that, yeah, if somebody could discover historically where it came from, that would be great. I personally haven't, I'm not overly interested in that because it's a phenomena that we, to the extent we're asleep, are habitually unconsciously recreating each and every moment or not. You see, the fact that we are complicit in its creation, that's pointing at that we also have the power to uncreate it.
Intriguing, because one of the things that I did find interesting in your work is you emphasize it's important to shed light on evil, which is a very interesting concept of even what we mean when we talk about light in this context and what we mean by evil in this context. So, firstly, we need to define what we mean by light and what we mean by evil, and then extrapolate from there.
Yeah, well, for example, so many people think, oh, if I have this enlightenment experience, I'm seeing the light. And I point out, yeah, that's one form of having illumination, but seeing the darkness is also a form of illumination, you know? And if our job is to cultivate the light and our light and to protect the light than forces that threaten it, we can't possibly do that if we're asleep to the darker forces that threaten the light. So, and the thing about if you have light, light has no really, what's the benefit of light if it doesn't shed light on darkness? And so the idea is it's by actually by shedding light on the darker forces, by making the darkness conscious. That's the way we depotentiate the powers of evil, because the way Watiko or evil works is that to the extent we're unaware of it, it then covertly it operates through our unconscious blind spots, such that we then unwittingly become its instrument to act it out in our world. And we only do that, even with the best of intentions, because we're not awake to that darkness. But the darkness, the Watiko mind virus, it doesn't want to be exposed, because to see it not only takes away its power over us, because then it can't act itself out through us, but then when we see it, we become empowered. You see, so what I'm pointing at is that Watiko, it's literally initiating us into this genius, this creative genius that is our nature. And this is the solution to all the myriad world crises. In this sense, what I mean is that we have this unimaginable creative agency and power, each one of us, and we always have had it. But to the extent we don't know we have it, then it gets projected out, and other seemingly other energies pick up our own creativity, like the powers of the state, and they turn it against us in a way that is killing us. What I'm pointing out is that the Watiko mind virus, it will kill us. Or the other option, it's actually showing us, it's initiating us into our creative genius. And when enough of us actualize that and have that realization consciously of who we are, that we're creative beings, and we could connect with each other, with other creative beings, and we can literally change the dream, the waking dream. And that's to participate in our own evolution. That's what Watiko is offering us. If Watiko didn't exist, we would have to invent it. That's how important it is.
I'm sure here that Sarah would be quite interested to come in on this, because Sarah is very involved and interested in lucid dreaming and dream incubation and everything. So,
Right.
Sarah, what's your thoughts or observations or questions so far on that?
Well, a lot of what you were saying there was reminding me of the sleep temples of Asclepius, and I saw that you used the rod of Asclepius on your book cover.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this idea that the chthonic gods are usually the gods associated with healing, and especially in dreams that are incubated in order to facilitate healing. And there's the idea as well in the Asclepian sleep temples of this poison and panacea. And panacea almost seems to be this personification of a healing that can occur in response to dream phenomena. So there's a healing that seems to occur spontaneously, in the same way that a placebo effect might be activated, or a faith healing response might be activated when dream content inspires physical change and transformation. So I found that really interesting, that there's this idea of the darkness and the light and the chaos and the order being required and to be in balance.
Yeah. No, that is definitely true. And the idea of, like, the dream incubation temples, that's so interesting to me, because, when sufficient people, for example, dream up, oh, here's a place, these dream temples, where we go to have healing dreams. And then, of course, that makes it way more probable that people will have the healing dreams. And that's pointing at the power of our minds, that we can literally dream up places or people or circumstances to help us awaken, And I point out that encoded in the fabric of this waking dream, there are all these potential clues that are helping us to remember that we're dreaming.
I think
Because in essence, yeah.
The remembering aspect of it is really important as well, because one of the goddesses that I'm most interested in is Mnemosyne, who's a personification of memory. And she was often the last goddess to be invoked at the rituals at the Asclepias. And this is really interesting to me because it makes me think of Mnemosyne is often described as having golden hair and being a being of light. And it's this idea of she acts as psychopomp for when you go into your dream at night and you're going into this dark realm, and she brings the light of remembrance into that dark realm so that you can see and remember and consciously be aware of what's occurring. But in terms of something non-physical facilitating a spontaneous healing event, I think that you can even look at things like dream orgasm, and the fact that you can have dream content that facilitates a physical bodily response, which everyone will have experienced. And
Right.
that if that's occurring, there's probably a hit and miss element with regards to healing. But if you have the situation and you're particularly kind of skilled at that you could actually activate a specific healing response in your body.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And you see, what's interesting to me about this conversation is, yeah, on the one hand, there are these, higher dimensional spiritual forces that, can help us to remember, and we can actually consciously, in a way, engage and participate in our own awakening process, by, like, planting, like, it's almost like if I plant something in this moment in my house, that's gonna, when I find it, that's gonna help me to remember that I'm dreaming. And then, like, the next day I find it and I, like, oh, it brings this lucid moment. One way of envisioning that is that a past self, the part that planted that clue, is communicating outside of time with a future self, that then when it finds it, oh, I remember that I'm dreaming. And it's really interesting when you consider, oh, is a future self actually, has it, like, extended itself back in time and has planted clues right now for us to discover. So the idea that we can engage in a playful way with our own awakening process is so interesting. And the thing about memory that you brought up, because it's not hard to be in a dream and have a lucid moment and recognize you're dreaming, but then it, with the undertow of the unconscious, it's kind of easy to get absorbed back in the dream and forget. So the idea, from my point of view, of spiritual practice is just to stabilize that realization, to have every moment and everything that's happening be, help you to remember, to help you to stabilize that lucid state.
It's interesting that you mention this, because when I was reading your material, I was particularly interested in the parallels between a great deal of what you write about are my own daemon Eidolon dyad, and the
Right.
idea that our future self, effectively what I would call our daemon, which is the being that's already experienced our life in linear fashion and has experienced it many times, can send messages back into the past because
Right.
it is like the Linga Surya, it's the long body of
Right.
Hinduism and Vedanta. And I was particularly intrigued because you mention the work and the writings, particularly the philosophical writings of Philip K. Dick. And as you're probably aware, I've written
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
biography of Philip K.
No, I
Dick.
have your book. Yeah,
All
totally.
right, and of
Yeah.
course
Yeah.
his experiences, and it resonates when you were describing it before. All the time, I was thinking Philip K. Dick. It's 2374 all over again with Paul. He's experiencing something profoundly similar to Phil when he experienced Valis. You know, it's fascinating. Now, the one area that both of us are both fascinated in is, and with your latest book, is the relationship between Wetiko and how we deal with Wetiko and the discoveries of quantum mechanics and quantum physics.
Right.
And I know your new book goes into great detail, and we parallel in many ways our interest in people like John Wheeler, interest
Right.
in people like David Bohm. So, can you
Right.
tell us a little bit about how the dynamic works between quantum mechanics and quantum physics and your model of reality and the dreaming reality we're talking about?
Yeah, yeah, totally. So quantum physics, before quantum physics came on the scene a century ago, um, pre-quantum physics really conceived of this world as being objective, as being separate from the observer. And we were just passively trying to observe this universe so as to understand it. And then here quantum physics comes on the scene, and it basically empirically proves that the idea of objective reality is just that. It's an idea with no correlate, to actually what's happening in the world. And in other words, that the act of observing this universe actually influences the universe observed. That, by the way, that's a description of a dream. So what that means is that the act of observation is creative. It's not, we're not passively observing, but each and every moment, how we interpret reality and the meaning we place on reality, it's helping to invoke the very reality that we think we're describing, but we're actually, in a way co-creating. And that's the rabbit hole where I point out that what quantum physics is showing us, that's the medicine for Wetiko. Because Wetiko, we become entranced by our mind's own projections. So here's an example. In a dream, if I'm holding a viewpoint in a dream, right, and say my viewpoint is that the world that I'm experiencing in that dream is separate from me, is solid, is objective. Well, being a dream is nothing other than this reflection of my mind. As soon as I hold that viewpoint, the entire dream will reflect back, giving me all the evidence, confirming the viewpoint that my perception is true, i.e., that the universe I'm in is objective. Now I have the confirmation. So then I become even more fixed in my viewpoint that the world that I'm in, this dream world, is objective. And the more I see that, the more the world just will confirm that viewpoint ad infinitum. It's a feedback loop whose origin is my own mind. So in other words, that's an example that I've hypnotized by my own creative genius in a way that where my genius, instead of being really wild and free and expansive, is limited by, the way I'm actually projecting onto the ink blot. So quantum physics comes along and it's basically saying, it's giving insight into that process. It's saying, hey, there is no objective world. And actually the way you observe the world actually affects the world observed. And what quantum physics, in my book, I basically point out, in essence, what it discovered is that we're having a collective dream.
Mm.
Unequivocally, it's saying that. And of course, that's, from my point of view, undebatable. You see, because every quantum physicist, they're all in agreement about one thing and in disagreement about another thing. The thing they all agree about is that it's the greatest discovery ever in all of history in the realm of science. There's no quantum physicist I know who doesn't agree with that. What the controversy is what does it mean? And the typical quantum academic corporate physicist is not trained to recognize the dreamlike nature. And because their whole sense of reality, the rug will gets pulled out from under them so profoundly. And not only about the nature of reality, but the nature of who they are. Because when there is no objective world, what happened to the subject?
Mm.
I, as a subject, need an object to be in relationship to in order to be a subject. When there's no object, who am I? You see, so quantum physics promotes itself to be a spiritual path. That's what I mean, that it's offering us the medicine for Wetiko.
I'm very much in agreement with you in this, because one of the things in my last book I'm developing and continuing to develop with associates of mine is this concept of what I term the of egregorial reality, which is effectively that we are co-creating the reality around us by collapsing the wave function of the reality by our act of observation, and the very fact that, recent research is showing, I mean, the work of Anton Zeilinger at the University of Vienna, whereby,
Right.
you're getting you're getting molecules now, large molecules that are up to 40% the size of a virus, that are now showing wave particle duality and showing the influence, like buckyballs, 60 separate atoms inside a buckyball is brought from a statistical wave function into a point reality, and this is very, very intriguing, isn't it? And we see this in the world around us, that if we collectively anticipate something is going to take place, it seems to manifest. There's this kind of feedback mechanism, and this is why I'm very interested in your work and how it kind of mirrors mine in a very interesting way. There's an old statement that says there's many paths to the top of the mountain, but the view from the top is still the same. And you're coming from experiential and very profound experiential experiences. And whenever I'm reading your material, I'm always, and it's somebody I referenced earlier on, it's Jakob Boehme. All the time when I'm reading your work, I'm going, this is so similar to what he experienced, this kind of breaking through the facade, almost breaking through the belief system Maya, for want of a better term, within Vedanta, and the idea of seeing through it. And one of the things, it seems to me, it is dreamlike, and I think your point about this being a collective dream is incredibly powerful. And you argue, don't you, that there's a definite parallel and link between Tibetan Buddhism, presumably from the Bon tradition, I guess, that you're working on here, through to modern quantum physics. And I know from books like the Dancing Wei Lu Masters and various other people, and Itzhak Bentov as well, and his work. So where do you come from in terms of the links between Buddhism and modern quantum physics?
Yeah, no, totally. And I really, so I'm a longtime Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, Nyingma lineage. And one of the things, so Tibetan Buddhism and the teachings of the Buddha and Padmasambhava and my lamas, they'll give teachings, and it word for word is what quantum physics has discovered. And so in the lineage I do practice to, there's something called the Terma tradition. And Terma is a word that means the hidden treasures. And it's actually a real thing. It's the way that the lineage propagates itself over time and keeps itself fresh. So in other words, if the practitioners get a little bit one-sided or stale in their practice, all of a sudden there'll be one of these Terma, one of these hidden treasures. Think about it, they're encoded in the fabric of the multi-dimensional cosmos, and they'll be discovered at exactly the right moment in time, that, oh, here's a new practice, or here's a blessing, or here's a new, prayer. But the idea is, think about it like a dream. When an individual person gets one-sided, well, what does the unconscious do? It compensates. It brings it out of from the dream, emerges and into the dream, a symbol that will correct that one-sidedness. That's the idea of these hidden treasures. They're like alarm clocks hidden in the fabric of the dream that help us to wake up. And it's a real thing. I mean, it's not just a fairy tale idea. These Terma, scholars study it, and it's mind-blowingly profound. And what I've recently brought out is that quantum physics, can be envisioned. I'm hesitant to appropriate the Tibetan Buddhist idea of Terma, of hidden treasure, but everything I know about Terma and everything I know about quantum physics can be seen to be an analog of a modern day Terma that emerged into our world right at the right moment in time and emerged into our minds, the minds of physicists and all of us, to help us to awaken, to help us to dispel Wetiko. And because what quantum physics, like I was saying, is showing us, when you really, try to get to the essence, because the founding fathers of quantum physics, they talk about, we still haven't found the central idea. and it's going to be a simple idea, and it should be able to be expressed on a t-shirt or a bumper sticker or in 5 words. And the image used is like, oh, we've come across this automobile, but we've never seen an automobile, and we don't know what is its function. And we turn on the radio or the headlights or the turn signal, but we still haven't really figured out, what it's about. In the same way, the discoveries of quantum physics have changed the course of history and technology and computers and all that, but we still haven't found the main idea, just like we haven't found that main idea of that automobile. And what I'm pointing out is that, yeah, the main idea of quantum physics is that we're having a dream. And I'm not saying that in a metaphorical sense. I've actually had, sort of arguments. There was this one very eminent Tibetan translator came to my house a number of years ago, and he was saying, no, 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 this is like a dream. It's metaphorical. And I'm saying, no, 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 that's not at all it. This is a dream. That if we think this is metaphorically like a dream, then we will dream up the evidence to confirm that. But this is nothing other than a dream in a literal sense, a collectively shared dream.
You're quite right here. I mean, with some of the things that really intrigue me, am I still there, by the way? Because I know that my image might have gone.
Yeah, I just see your image. Okay.
Oh, good, okay. Because one of the things, again, the idea of living within a dream and the way in which we are creating this dream, because we know from modern day neurology that effectively what is taking place is that we are inwardly creating this inner version of what external reality is, and again, it's a quote I've used many, many times, that you look into quantum physics and you discover that the discoveries themselves almost self-created themselves. Many times I've quoted, the E. Rabi quotation when they discovered the muon, when he turned around and he said, who ordered that? It seems as if we anticipate the quantum physics, and then the wave function of that particular theory comes down and creates a new form of science. And of course, what we're talking here about, isn't it, hidden variables? It's the idea of how deep down the rabbit hole do you go in terms of quantum mechanics. And when I was reading your material, I'm delighted because one of my favorite sites that I've used in many of my writings is the Hymn of the Pearl. And you're the only other writer I know that's picked up on the nuanced power of the Gnostic Hymn of the Pearl. And would you just like to discuss that slightly, just about the Hymn of the Pearl and the magic of that? And then I'll put you across to Sarah again, because I know that she's probably very interested in all these dream issues.
Yeah. Well, the Hymn of the Pearl, it's so interesting. We're like, so here, the father, who's the king, a great king, his pearl falls into Egypt, into this other land, and think of Egypt symbolizing, just into the physical realm from a higher dimensional realm. And it falls down a well, the pearl, and it's, guarded by a dragon, a poisonous dragon. And so the king sends his son to retrieve the pearl. But the son gets seduced by physical temptation and gets absorbed in the forms of the dream and forgets who he is and forgets that he has this mission. And so then the king sends a letter, to the son that helps the son to remember, oh, I'm of divine origin, and I have a mission to accomplish. So then, he actually accomplishes the mission and brings the pearl back to his father, and that's the parable. But encoded in that's so symbolic, because if you think about it like a dream, and the king, all the different parts are parts of ourselves. And, it so much maps onto, in all the wisdom traditions and Gnosticism, alchemy, that spirit gets imprisoned in matter. And our job is to help to free the spirit that's imprisoned in the physical world. But the king who sends a letter, that's the part of us that actually can intervene in the dream, to help us to remember who we are, as is the son, is the part of us that can easily get absorbed in the forms of the dream. So I find it an incredibly profoundly symbolic myth.
Oh, totally. I mean, I very much linked it in with the daimon and the eidolon, and the idea of the eidolonic mind and the demonic mind, and the way in which the two interact and the one communicates with the other, which we touched on before. But on top of that, the whole power of the Platonic ideas, the writings of Plato in terms of amnesis, and of course anamnesis and the loss of amnesis. And again, this comes wonderfully back to Philip K. Dick, doesn't it? Because Philip K. Dick, in his book The Divine Invasion, where he has the young child Manny, who is God, who's forgotten he's God and he's embodied within the body. And then from there we move to Manichaeism and a lot of the old Gnostic beliefs. And it's all this argument that we are trapped within a dream that's self-created. And again, rolling back to Sarah on this, because this is such an area that Sarah is fascinated in, aren't you? And with your new book, you'll be zooming in on a lot of this.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking there what you were talking about with regard to the hymn of the pearl is the mystery initiations, and how so many of the mystery initiations were all about experiencing a death in order to recognize the divine, or remember your divine origins. And that's what happens when you become lucid in a dream. You suddenly recognize that you're the creator of everything in your dream world, and that you have this omnipotence in the dream state where you're not just seeing through your eyes, you're like an all-seeing being, and you can see from multiple perspectives. And one of the interesting things about in the Near East and in Egypt, there was this idea that the underworld was this realm of future secrets. And so you could learn about the future by traveling through the underworld, because as the sun passed through the underworld every single night, it was privy to these secrets. And so when you traveled in death or in dreams, that was a place where you could perhaps learn things about the future as well.
Well, that's beautiful. And I just want to say this conversation, it's clear we're all plugged into the same thing, because we're going through a shamanic death rebirth experience.
That was going to be my next question, the links here to shamanism, which is really intriguing.
Right. Yeah. Sure. And if I could, I'm happy. The big article I wrote right before the pandemic hit was all about shamanism, because I was realizing that's in a way, one of the primary archetypes that's activated in the collective unconscious of our species. And, if you think about the shamanic trip, it gets consolated by being wounded and traumatized and all that, because then we split. And that actually activates a part of us to go in search of the other part that's disassociated. And, and if you think about what a shaman does, they're just so empathic, and they will literally take on the illness of the person they work with. And by taking it on, it means having it out with and taking it within themselves, and they will literally fall ill. But they somehow are able to carry that experience of subjectively experiencing the illness from within and of falling ill as the way to even more deeply connect with their wholeness. And by them doing that and metabolizing the illness, that in a non-local energetic way gets transmitted to the field and helps the other person or the community or the world, to have a corresponding healing. And the point is, we're all potential, we're being called to be potential shamans in training. And the shaman is related to the wounded healer, which is really like when we all have a wound, and instead of just, oh, if only I didn't have the wound, or let me go around the wound. No, by going through the wound, that's the initiation where you access your gifts. So it's all the shamanic wounded healer, and that's, we're all being called to be these potential wounded healer shamans in training.
Paul, are you based in LA? Are you in LA, or whereabouts are you?
No, I'm in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, right.
Okay. Which at times feels like this center of the universe. There's so much stuff that goes on in Portland.
Because one of the people that really we need to put you in touch with is Myron Dial, who's been a previous guest on this show on 2 or 3 occasions. And Myron is very much the wounded shaman, and I've described a lot of his experiences in my books and in his own work. And of course, it links into temporal lobe epilepsy. It links into altered states of consciousness and everything else as well. And Myron, I would imagine if Myron, when he watches this, he's going to be desperately wanting to get in touch with you, because I can really see synergy here between what you're talking about and what Myron is talking about. Now, I'm aware already, it is always phenomenal how we all know that time is just a time construct of the mind. But an hour, we haven't even begun to start discussing in any shape or form your work. But in many, many ways, to just put towards the end, you believe that quantum physics can be the hope for the future, and our understanding of it can help us through. So for the last few minutes, can you explain exactly how you think quantum physics will facilitate us breaking away from and breaking out of the dream? And indeed, if we do break out of the dream, what does it mean?
Yeah. No, I appreciate that question. Well, quantum physics, is showing us the way out of the spell of scientific materialism, where we actually think that, the world is objective and there are separate things, and that we're a separate thing interacting with other separate things, because quantum physics is showing this is a quantum cosmos through and through on every scale. And what that means is that there's no separation between anything, that things don't even exist in and of themselves, that it's all just one seamlessly interconnected whole, that's the nature of our quantum world. And to see that is to begin to snap out of the spell of imagining we exist in a way that we don't. Because a way to understand Wetiko, even in the apocryphal text, every spiritual tradition is pointing at Wetiko in different words, but in the apocryphal text, they talk about a counterfeiting spirit and they describe it, and that's word for word Wetiko. But of course, that got edited out of the Bible because Wetiko can't, it was on the editorial board, Wetiko was, and it can't stand to be exposed. But the counterfeiting spirit, it puts us on, it impersonates us. If we're not awake, we identify with its version of ourselves. And then as soon as we do that, we're a goner, because then we've identified with who we're not, we've given ourselves away, and we've disconnected from our creative agency. That's madness. That's Wetiko. Quantum physics is actually showing us that we ourselves, moment by moment, have this enormous agency in creating our experience. There's no one else doing that to us. We are the ones who have the creative power to create our experience. And when you have that realization dispels Wetiko, because when we connect with our creativity and with our compassion, that's a result of seeing through the separate self and realizing the interconnectedness. That's poison to Wetiko. That dispels Wetiko as we more and more remember who we are.
Yeah, 'cause I think many ways what you're saying here, the idea of, again, spirit trapped in matter. I'm reminded of Manny and Manny's statement that, we are all, what was the term he used now? It was something like the idea that matter is bottled light and light is bottled matter. And there is a shard of the pleroma that's trapped in all of us, the shard of the place, the reality behind the fullness that exists behind this reality. And we have within us, and I'd argue that's the daimon in my model, but other people will have different models. And it seems, that we are desperate to find that. And I think there is a growing upswell of humanity looking inwards to find this special something. Finally, Sarah, would you like to ask a final question, and then we'll have Paul say how people can contact him with his work?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about Wetiko in the native traditions. Does it have a visible or tangible form, or is it presented in any form at all?
Yeah, they would symbolize it by this monster that would just continually, be driven to excess and have an insatiable appetite to just, eat and devour and consume, but it never gets satiated. So, and of course, that's a way of describing evil, when there's that dynamic. And so, yeah, and I've just, as a modern person, I've given myself liberty to sort of, to create a psychological idiom for what Native Americans were pointing at in with the idea of Wetiko, to translate it into a psychological idiom in a way that could actually maybe more easily speak to, modern day people, And one final thing I want to say, the idea of daimon that you've mentioned, Tony, that in a sense is also the solution for Wetiko, because the daimon is the guiding spirit. It's the inner voice. It's the angel, and it connects us with the part of us it connects us with genius, with the genius, with our genius. It's our familiar. And the idea from my point of view of any therapy is to connect us with that inner guide. And but the point is that if we don't get into conscious relationship with that inner guide, with that daimon, it becomes a demon. It becomes demonic. And so it's like a quantum phenomena. But if we connect with it consciously, and typically we get a calling, and it's important to ascend to the calling that the daimon is offering us, then, all of a sudden, then we found our vocation, and that's where we can really be of help.
Do you know, I'm developing very much in my new book. I'm having there's a whole hierarchy of the kakodemon, the idea of the negative evil side of the daemon, and the way in which, we don't necessarily, you don't need a kalos demon, you can have a kakos demon, because of course they're ambivalent, aren't they?
Right.
They're not there to do good or evil. They're there to protect us in one way or another. And in one of my books, I argue that during the Stauffenberg attack on Hitler, when the Stauffenberg plot, when Hitler automatically kicked the bomb to behind a pillar, and when the bomb went off, it saved him. But of course, that, I would argue, was a demonic thing. But effectively, it wasn't necessarily good for humanity, because it meant that Hitler survived for a little bit longer. So there are so many things we have to discuss here. As I said, we've scratched the surface, really. So we will have you back for a much longer show, where we'll really drill into the themes. And you'll find with our Incon, it's far more informal than this. We have a structure of an hour. But in Incon, we really just expand on the ideas, and we invite people from outside to come in and have their comments as well. Because I know so many people are so intrigued by your work. The amount of people over the years that have been contacting me about your work, because they are intrigued by it. Because it has, unlike my work, which is just explanatory and nothing more, your work not only is explanatory, but it then gives a way round a process whereby we can release ourselves from this. And I think that is profoundly important. So, Paul, can you let people know how they can contact you, your website? And your website is wonderful, by the way. I've just spent hours on it, just reading your postings. But if you can let people know how they can contact you and everything else, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Yeah. So I have this website, awakeninthedream.com. And on that website, there's just a ton of free articles, because I want to get this information out. And there's a ton of, interviews like this or talks I give, all for free. And then, on, through the website, there's a contact button. You can contact me, send me an email. And yeah, I just want to get this work out. So please, go and visit my website. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been fascinating, even more fascinating than I anticipated. It's been really, really enjoyable. So we have to continue on this. And everybody, thank you again for listening in. This will be posted on my YouTube site probably later this evening or first thing tomorrow. And if anybody is interested in pointing people in the direction of Paul's work, please do, and indeed Sarah's work as well, because there's a great deal of synergy here, and it's very important that we all work together. And I think that's what's really nice about what we're developing with Consciousness Hour and with the Incons, is we're building this worldwide community of likewise thinking people. And effectively, by doing this collectively, I think we're raising the consciousness of so many people out there. And I'm very proud and very humbled to know that Sarah and I are in some way involved in this, and opening people to your ideas and everybody else's ideas as well. Because I think it's a huge Venn diagram. And one day...
Sorry, Anthony.
Go on, Sarah.
I was just going to say, you were talking about waking up out of the dream, but I wonder if the trick is really to realize you're dreaming and make it a really good dream. I
don't talk about waking up out of the dream. I talk about waking up in the dream.
Yeah.
To have lucidity in this dream, and then to realize, oh, wow, the way this dream is manifesting, we're dreaming it. And when you connect with other people who are also awakening, you discover, oh, we can dream it in a way that's much more in alignment with who we're discovering ourselves to be.
I think that's so important. When you made that point before, it really resonated me with the idea, we're not waking from the dream, we're waking in the dream. And that is so, so important. I mean, everything is a mind-created holographic image that we're existing within. And the moment we realize that is the moment that collectively we can change it. And we can do that collectively, because I don't believe individually we can, because maybe our thought patterns aren't more powerful enough to manipulate, but collectively we can. And I think this is the start of something extraordinary. And everybody that's been on this show, it is going to be extraordinary. We're very interesting times at the moment. And I think that we're going to do something special. I think the group of us that we're involved in here is going to be quite interesting and fascinating. And we're all being drawn together. And that's the thing I really like. It's the drawing together of ideas. And we're not in competition with each other. We're all adding colour to this picture We're adding depth to this picture. And, you know, one day when, Sarah, when we get that conference together down in Hastings, we're going to change the world, aren't we?
Yeah, I knew it was going to start in Hastings.
It will start in Hastings. Absolutely. Absolutely will do. Okay, thanks everybody for listening in. And again, thank you very much for our special guest, Paul Levy. And as always, thank you to Sarah for joining us and her incredible insights. So everybody, thanks very much. And we'll see you again soon. All the best. Bye-bye.